Secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I think a new world order is emerging.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system.
We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall never surrender.
Good day, everybody. How are you doing? This is UCY.tv with the Solvinur Event. I'm your host, Walter. Today is the 28th of February 2015. If you've never been to UCY.tv, go check that website out. If you mouse over shows and hosts, click on any of them, you end up in the chat room where you can ask questions or talk to quote-unquote like-minded people. Today we're going to continue with Larkin Rose's The Most Dangerous Superstition. I'm all prepared, got cigarette, coffee, so I hope you got something to drink as well. Good morning in the United States, where it's 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. in the Netherlands. So let's get this show started, shall we? This is part 3b, the effects of the myth on the enforcers. Now we may have done some of this, but this is where the PDF reopened the PDF reader reopened the PDF, so we should be here. This is where we should have left off. The lawmakers give the commands, but it is their faithful enforcers who carry them out. Millions upon millions of otherwise decent, civilized people spend day after day harassing, threatening, extorting, controlling, bullying, and otherwise oppressing others who have not harmed or threatened anyone. But because the actions of such law enforcers are deemed legal, and because they believe they are acting on behalf of the authority, they imagine themselves to bear no responsibility for their actions. Worse yet, they do not even view their own actions as being their own actions. They speak and act as if their minds and bodies have somehow been taken over by some invisible entity called the law or government. They say things like, hey, I don't make the laws, I just enforce them. It's not up to me. Right? That he's denying that he has a choice there, right? They speak and act as if it is impossible for them to do anything other than helplessly carry out the will of a power called authority, and that they are therefore no more personally responsible for their action than a puppet is responsible for what the puppeteer makes it do. When acting in their official capacity, while seemingly helplessly possessed by the spirit of authority, law enforcers behave in ways which they never otherwise would, and do things that they themselves would recognize as uncivilized, violent and evil if they did such things of their own volition, without an authority telling them to do so. Examples of this occur all over the world, every hour of the day, in a wide variety of ways. A soldier might shoot a complete stranger whose only sin was to be out walking in the military-occupied zone after a declared curfew. A group of heavily armed men might kick down someone's door and drag him away, or shoot a man in front of his wife and children because the man grew a plant, which politicians proclaimed to be forbidden. Brackets open, illegal, brackets close. A bureaucrat might file paperwork instructing a financial institution to take thousands of dollars out of someone's bank account in the name of tax collection. Another bureaucrat may send in armed thugs upon finding out that someone had the gall to build a deck on his own property with the approval of his neighbors but without government approval in the form of a building permit. A traffic cop may stop and extort someone via a ticket for not wearing a seatbelt. A TSA agent may rummage through someone's personal belongings without the slightest reason to suspect that the person has done or is going to do anything wrong. A judge may direct armed thugs to put someone in a cage for weeks, months, or years for anything from showing contempt for the judge to driving without the written permission of politicians in the form of a driver's license, to have engaged in any type of mutual voluntary but non-politician sanctioned illegal commerce. These examples and literally millions of others which could be given are acts of aggression committed by perpetrators who would not have committed them if they had not been directed to do so by a perceived authority. In short, most instances of theft, assault, and murder happen only because authority told someone to steal, attack, or kill. Most of the time, the people who carry out such orders would not have committed such crimes on their own. Of the 100,000 people who work for the Internal Revenue Service, how many engaged in harassment, extortion, and theft? How many were engaged in harassment, extortion, and theft before becoming an IRS agent? Few, if any. How many soldiers were around harassing, threatening, or killing people they did not know before joining the military? Few, if any. How many police officers regularly went around stopping, interrogating, and kidnapping non-violent people before becoming law enforcers? How many judges had people thrown into cages for non-violent behavior before being appointed to a court? When such acts of aggressions become legal and are done in the name of law enforcement, those who commit them imagine such acts to be inherently legitimate and valid, even though they recognize that, had they committed the very same acts on their own, instead of on behalf of an imagined authority, the acts would have constituted crimes and would have been immoral. While they are obviously that word I don't understand. Probably more While they are obviously more significant and less significant cogs in the wheel of government machine, from low-level paper pushers to armed mercenaries, they all have two things in common. 1. They inflict unpleasantness on others in a way they would not have done on their own. And 2. They accept no personal responsibility for their actions while in law enforcer mode. Nothing makes this more obvious than the fact that when the properness or morality of their actions is called into question, their response is almost always same variation of "I'm just doing my job." The obvious implication in all such statements is I'm not responsible for my actions because authority told me to do this. The only way that makes a shred of sense is if the person is literally incapable of refusing to do something a perceived authority tells him to do. Which of course is not so, because you always have a choice, right? We discussed that last week. Unfortunately, the horrific truth is that most people, as a result of their authoritarian indoctrination, do seem to be psychologically incapable of disobeying the commands of an imagined authority. Most people, given the choice between doing what they know is right and doing what they know is wrong when ordered to do so by a perceived authority, will do the latter. Nothing demonstrates this more dearly than the results of the psychology experiments done by Dr. Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. Yeah, I'm gonna copy that and put that in the chat in case you haven't ever seen that. Experiment, and paste that. If you haven't ever Googled that, you should. And check out what the heck went on there. In fact, he's going into it right here. The Milgram experiments is the next heading. In brief, the Milgram studies were designed to determine to what degree ordinary people would inflict pain upon strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. For the complete description of the experiments and the results, see Dr. Milgram's book, Obedience to Authority. Yeah, that's a fitting title, right? The following is a short synopsis of his experiments and findings. Subjects were asked to volunteer for what they were told was an experiment testing human memory. Under the supervision of a scientist, so-called authority figure, one person was strapped into a chair and wired with electrodes. And the other, the actual subject of the study, sat in front of a shock generating machine. Right? So the person sitting in front of the shock generating machine is thinking that the guy on the other side is actually the test subject. Right? So he has no clue that he is the test subject. And the guy sitting in chairs, supposedly with electrodes wired, isn't actually getting the shocks. That's an actor. The person in front of the zapper machine was told that the goal was to test whether shocking the other person when he gave a wrong answer to a memorization question would affect his ability to remember things. The true goal, however, was to test to what degree the person in front of the zapper machine would inflict pain on an innocent stranger simply because someone in the role of authority told him to. The zapper machine had a series of switches, going up to 450 volts, and the zapper subject was supposed to increase the voltage and administer another shock each time the zappee got an answer wrong. In truth, the zappee in test was an actor who was not being shocked at all, but at given voltage levels would give out shouts of pain, protest about heart troubles, demand to stop the experiment, scream for mercy, and eventually silence, feigning unconsciousness or death. In addition, the zapper machine was deadly marked with danger label. Was dearly marked with... I don't understand that word, dearly. In addition, the zapper machine was dearly marked with danger labels at the upper end of the series of the switches. The result of the experiment shocked even Dr. Milgram. Yeah, typical shock, right? In short, a significant majority of the subjects, nearly 2 out of 3, continued through the experiment right to the end, inflicting what they thought were excruciatingly painful, if not lethal, shocks to a complete stranger, despite the screams of agony, the cries for mercy, even the unconsciousness or death of the pretending victim. Dr. Milgram himself succinctly sums up the conclusion to be reached. With numbing regularity, good people were seen to knuckle under the demands of an authority and perform actions that were callous and severe. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. Of note, in the experiments, there was no threat that the zapper would be punished for failure to obey, nor was there any special reward promised for obedience. Yeah, as I remember that it was even so that the guy zapping, the zappee, was even paid in front of him doing his job. So he already had his reward. He could stop at any time he liked. So the results were not merely showing that an ordinary person might hurt someone else to save his own neck, or might hurt someone else if it somehow profited himself. Instead, the results showed that most people will inflict excruciating pain, even death, upon an innocent stranger for no other reason than that he was told to do so by a perceived authority. This point cannot be overstressed. There is a particular belief that leads basically good people to do bad things, even heinously evil things. Even the atrocities of Hitler's Third Reich were the result not of millions of evil people, but of a very small handful of truly evil people who had acquired positions of authority, and millions of obedient people who merely did what the perceived authority told them to do. In her book about Hitler's top bureaucrat, Adolf Eichmann, sometimes called the architect of the Holocaust, author Hannah Arendt, that sounds Dutch, Arendt, it's a Dutch word for eagle, used the phrase the banality of evil to refer to the fact that most evil is not the result of personal malice or hatred, but merely the result of blind obedience. Individuals giving up their own free wit and judgment in favor of unthinking subservience to an imagined authority. Alright, the only thing that bugs me about this particular little last piece is a reference to Adolf Eichmann which is really German, Eichmann, that's very specifically German, as being sometimes called the architect of the Holocaust, right? Should have said a little bit more about that than just leave people hanging there with this burnt offering, right? Interestingly, both Aaron Arendt's book and Dr. Milgram's experiment offended a lot of people. Why? Why would they be offended? The reason is simple. People who have been taught to respect authority and have been taught that obedience is a virtue and that cooperating with authority is what makes us civilized do not like to hear the truth, which is that truly evil people, with all their malice and hatred, pose far less of a threat to mankind than the basically good people who believe in authority. Yeah. Do you think they realize that? Especially the part where basically good people turn into evil. Anyone who honestly examines the results of Dr. Milgram's experiments cannot escape that fact of reality. But aside from the general lesson to be learned from the Milgram experiments, that most people will intentionally hurt other people if perceived authority tells them to, several other findings from Milgram's work are worth noting. Alright, some more, it's not a Zippo, Vince. It's what is it? Let's see, I think it's a Ronson. Yeah, just one of those lighters that won't go out when the wind blows over. Okay, so more Milgram stuff. Many of the subjects of the experiment showed signs of stress, guilt, and anguish while inflicting pain on others, and yet continued doing so. This fact demonstrates that these were not simply nasty sadists waiting for an excuse to hurt others. They did not enjoy doing it. Furthermore, it shows that the people knew that they were doing something wrong and did it anyway because authority told them to. Some subjects protested, begged to be allowed to stop, trembled uncontrollably, even cried, and yet most continued to the end of the experiment. The conclusion could hardly be more obvious. The belief in authority makes good people commit evil. The subject's income level, education level, age, sex, and other demographic factors seem to have little or no influence on the results. Statistically speaking, a rich, cultured, educated young woman will obey an authoritarian command to hurt someone else just as readily as an illiterate, poor male manual laborer will. The one common factor shared by all of those who continued to the end of the experiment is that they believed in authority. Yeah, obviously, says here between brackets. Again, the message to be learned, however troubling it may be, is logically inescapable. Regardless of almost any other factors, the belief in authority turns good people into agents of evil. Right. Third, the average person, when the experiment is described to him, not including the results, guesses that the compassion and conscience of most people would prevent them from continuing through the entire experiment. Professional psychiatrists predicted that only about 1 in 1,000 would obey to the end of the experiment. Yeah, right. And those are the professionals, right? They don't know shit. When in reality it was about 65%. And when the average person, who has not actually been tested, if asked if he personally would have gone to the end of the study if he had been tested, he usually insists that he would not have. Yeah, so that's also, it's a denial of his own belief in authority, right? Yet the majority do. Again, the message is troubling, but indisputable. Almost everyone hugely underestimates the degree to which the belief in authority, even in himself, can be used to persuade good people to commit evil. Number 4. Dr. Milgram also found that some test subjects, defying all reason, were determined to blame the result of their own blind obedience on the victim, the one being shocked. In other words, through whatever twisted mentality it took, some of those doing the shocking imagined that the one being shocked was somehow to blame for his own suffering. With that in mind, it should come as no surprise that when police officers are caught assaulting innocent civilians, or when soldiers are caught terrorizing or murdering civilians, or when prison guards are caught torturing prisoners, their defense is often to blame the victim, no matter how much the authoritarian aggressor no matter how much the authoritarian aggressors have to mangle the truth and logic in order to do so. Interestingly, even though at the Nuremberg trials just following orders was not accepted as a valid excuse for what the Nazis did, it is still the standard response from countless soldiers, police, tax collectors, bureaucrats, and other representatives of authority whenever the morality of their behavior is questioned. Both in Milgram's experiment and in countless real-life abuses of power, those who intentionally hurt others simply fall back on the standard excuse. Claiming that they were not personally responsible because they were merely following orders. In the Milgram experiments, several subjects and directly were... What's this? Okay, let's try this again. In the Milgram experiments, several subjects even directly asked the authority figure which of them was responsible for what was happening. When the authority figure said that he was the one responsible, meaning himself, most subjects went on without further debate, apparently comfortable with the notion that whatever happened from then on was not their fault and they would not be held liable. Again, the message is difficult to escape. The belief in authority allows basically good people to dissociate themselves from the evil acts they themselves commit, relieving them of any feeling of personal responsibility. Number 5. When it was left up to the zapper what voltage to use, only very rarely would he go above 150 volts, the point at which the one pretending to be shocked said he did not want to go on. It is very important to note that up to that point, and almost all subjects made it to that point, the zappee let out grunts of pain but did not ask for the experiment to stop. As a result, the one doing the zapping could quite reasonably say that the one being zapped had agreed to the arrangement, and up to that point was still a willing participant. Interestingly, of the few subjects who would not go all the way to the end, many of them stopped as soon as the zappee said he wanted out. This could be dubbed the libertarian line, since once the zappee asked to be unstrapped for the Zapper to continue anyway constitutes initiating violence against another, the exact thing libertarians oppose. Yeah. Again, such a politically tainted word, right? Unfortunately, those who stop at the libertarian line are only a small majority of the population. As for the rest, the findings are disturbingly clear. Of all the people who would, at the behest of authority, shock someone who calmly said, "I don't want this anymore," most would continue inflicting pain even if the victim was screaming in agony. Is this because most people are evil? No, it's because they have been conditioned to do as they are told and have been indoctrinated into the most dangerous superstition of all, the belief in authority. It should be noted that even Dr. Milgram could not escape his own indoctrination into the cult of authority worship. In passing, and with very little comment, even he opined, again that word, last week. I don't even know how to pronounce that. I'm going to say, even he made the opinion that we cannot have a society without some structure of authority. Yeah. He made a weak attempt to defend teaching obedience to authority by saying, obedience is often rational. It makes good sense to follow the doctor's orders, to obey traffic signs, and to clear the building when the police inform us of a bomb threat. Yet none of those examples actually requires or justifies a belief in authority. Yeah. Despite the way people often talk, doctors do not give orders. They are authorities in the sense that they are knowledgeable in the field of medicine, but not in the sense of having any right to rule. As for the other examples, the main reason to observe the rules of the road or to leave a building with a bomb in it is not because obedience to authority is a virtue, but because the alternative is injury or death. If some non-authority in a theater pulled a bomb from under his seat, held it up for all to see and said, "A bomb, let's get out of here," would everyone else stay where they were because the person was not perceived as an authority? Of course not. And if government repealed the law saying which side of the road everyone should drive on, would people start randomly swerving around? Of course not. They would keep driving on the right side because they do not want to crash into each other. So, although even Dr. Milgram clung to the notion that the belief in authority is somehow necessary and good, he gave no rational argument to support such an assertion. It is a testament to the strength of the myth of authority that even someone who had witnessed what Dr. Milgram had witnessed was still unable to completely give up the superstition. After Dr. Milgram publicized his findings, many were shocked and dismayed by the extent to which normal people were willing to inflict pain or death upon innocent strangers when instructed to do so by a perceived authority. Similar tests performed since Dr. Milgram's experiments have yielded similar results, which continue to shock people. However, the results really should not be surprising to anyone who has taken a look at how most human beings are raised. Alright, that was the Dr. Milgram paragraphs. Moving on to the next heading, Teaching Blind Obedience. The purported purpose of schools is to teach reading, writing, mathematics and other academic fields of thought. But the message that institutions of education actually teach far more effectively than any useful knowledge or skills is the idea that subservience and blind obedience to authority are virtues. Simply consider the environment in which the majority of people spend most of their formative years. Year after year, students live in a world in which they receive approval, praise and reward for being where authority tells them to be, when authority tells them to be there. They receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for being anywhere else. This includes the fact that they are coerced into being into school to begin with. They receive approval, praise and reward for doing what authority tells them to do. They receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for doing anything else, or for failing to do what authority tells them to do. They receive approval, praise and reward for speaking when and how authority tells them to speak, and receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for speaking at any other time, in any other way, or about any subject other than what authority tells them to speak about, or for failing to speak when authority tells them to speak. They receive approval, praise and rewards for repeating back whatever ideas the authority declares to be true and important, and receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for disagreeing, verbally or on a written test, with the opinions of those claiming to be authority, or for thinking or writing about subjects other than what authority tells them to think or write about. They receive approval, praise and reward for immediately telling authority about any problems or personal conflicts they encounter, and receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for trying to solve any problems or settle any disagreements on their own. They receive approval, praise and reward for complying with whatever rifles. Oh, not rifles. Yeah. It's probably a typo, or I don't know this word. RILLES. What's that supposed to be? They receive approval, praise and reward for complying with whatever riles, however arbitrary, authority decides to impose on them. Oh, this is probably rules. They receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for disobeying any such rules. Yeah, see? These rules can be about almost anything, including what clothes to wear, what hairstyle to have, what facial expression to have, how to sit in a chair, what to have on a desk, what direction to face, and what words to use. They receive approval, praise and reward for telling the authority when another student has disobeyed the rules, and receive disapproval, reproach and punishment for failing to do so. The student clearly and immediately see that, in their world, there are two distinct classes of people: masters, brackets open, teachers, brackets close, and subjects, students, and that the rules of proper behavior are drastically different for the two groups. The masters constantly do things that they tell the subjects not to do: boss people around, control others via threats, take property from others, etc. This constant and obvious double standard teaches the subjects that there is a very different standard of morality for the masters than there is for the subjects. The subjects must do whatever the masters tell them to, and only what the masters tell them to, Well, the masters can do pretty much anything they want. Not long ago, the masters would even routinely commit physical assault against subjects who did not quickly and unquestioningly do as they were told, while telling the subjects that it was completely unacceptable for them to ever use physical violence, even in self-defense. Especially in self-defense against the masters. Thankfully, the use of regular, overt physical violence by teachers has become uncommon. However, though the force has become less obvious, the basic methods of authoritarian control and punishment remain. In the classroom setting, the authority can change the rules at will, can punish the entire group for what one student does, and can question or search any student, or all students, at any time. The authority is never seen as having any obligation to justify or explain to the students the rules it makes, or anything else it does. And it is of no concern to authority whether a student has a good reason to think that his time would be better spent somewhere else, doing something else, or thinking about something else. The grades the students receive, the way he is treated, the signals he is sent, written, verbal and otherwise, all depend upon one factor: his ability and willingness to unquestioningly subvert his own desires, judgment and decisions to those of authority. If he does that, he is deemed good. If he does not, he is deemed bad. This method of indoctrination was not accidental. No, it wasn't. Also note that, and this is just me interjecting here, that there was already a lot of knowledge available to be able to make these schools work in the way that they do, right? Schooling in the United States, and in fact in much of the world, was deliberately modeled after the Prussian system of education, which was designed with the express purpose of training people to be obedient tools of the ruling class. Right? So by that time, there was already a lot of knowledge about the human psyche, so that they could make these schools work as intended, so to speak, all right? As intended by the ruling class. Easy to manage and quick to unthinkingly obey, especially for military purposes. As it was explained by Johann Fichte, the German, Johann Fichte, one of the designers of the Prussian system, the goal of this method was to fashion the student in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what those in authority want him to will. At the time, the system was openly admitted to be a means of psychologically enslaving the general populace to the will of the ruling class. And it continues to accomplish exactly that, all over the world. The reason most people do whatever authority tells them to, regardless of whether the command is moral or rational, is because that is exactly what they were trained to do. Everything about authoritarian schooling and authoritarian parenting, even the modern version that pretends to be caring and open-minded, continuously hammers into the head of the youngsters the notion that their success, their goodness, their very worth as human beings is measured by how well they obey authority. Is it any wonder then that let's see, what is this supposed to say? That rather than applying logic to evidence to reach their own conclusions, most adults look for an authority to tell them what to think. Is it any wonder that when a man with a badge starts barking orders, most adults timidly obey without question, even if they've done nothing wrong? Is it any wonder that most adults sheepishly submit to whatever interrogation and searches law enforcers want to inflict upon them? Is it any wonder that many adults will run to the nearest authority to solve any problem or settle any dispute? Is it any wonder that most adults will comply with any order, however irrational, unfair, or immoral it may be, if they imagine the one giving the order to be authority? Should any of this be surprising in light of the fact that nearly everyone went through many years of being deliberately trained to behave that way? Dr. Milgram's experiments made it quite clear that the kind of people produced, even by our modern, supposedly enlightened society, even in the good old USA, that supposed bastion of liberty and justice, are, for the most part, callous, irresponsible, unthinking tools for whichever megalomaniac claims the right to rule. When the people are intentionally trained to humbly submit to the beast called authority, when they are taught that it is more important to obey than it is to judge, why should we at all be surprised at the extortion, oppression, terrorism, and mass murder that are committed just because the proclaimed authority commanded it? Right? When you hear the word judge here, you should be reminded of what we discussed in the trivium about that word. Right? It's more about using your own brain than it is about, quote-unquote, judging anybody or anything. All of human history makes the deadly formula as plain as it could possibly be. A few evil rulers plus many obedient subjects equals widespread injustice and oppression. Next heading. Like that. The next heading is Making Monsters. There should also be at least some mention here about the psychological study done at Stanford University in 1971, in which a sort of mock prison was set up, with dozens of students appointed as mock prisoners and others as mock prison guards. The experiment had to be terminated early, only after 6 days, because those who had been given the authority had become shockingly callous, abusive, and sadistic towards their prisoners. It must be noted that the abuse committed by the guards even went beyond what they were told to do by those running the experiment, which was designed to humiliate and degrade the prisoners. This shows that the personal, malicious, and sadistic tendencies in an individual is a significant factor to such abuse, contributing factor to such abuse, but that most people openly act out such tendencies only when given a position of authority that they believe gives them permission to do so. The same phenomenon can be seen in all sorts of abuses of power, whether by a bureaucrat on a power trip, a soldier or a police officer who likes to bully or assault civilians, or any other official who enjoys lording his power over others. These demonstrate that not only does the belief in authority allow basically good people to become tools of oppression and injustice, but it also brings out dramatically amplifies whatever potential for malice, hatred, sadism, and love of dominion those people may possess. The superstition of authority begins by making average people mere agents of evil, which Arendt describes as the banality of evil, but then goes on to make such people personally evil by convincing them that they have the right or even the duty to abuse and oppress other people. This can be seen in the behavior of soldiers, police, prosecutors, judges, even petty bureaucrats. Anyone whose job consists of harassing, extorting, threatening, coercing, and controlling decent people will, sooner or later, become at least callous, if not downright sadistic. One can continually act like a monster without even becoming one. No, not. One cannot. One cannot continually act like a monster without eventually becoming one. Right? Another important thing to note, as shown in countless examples of abuse of power, is that when a belief in authority can lead people to inflict harm on others, that same belief often cannot limit the extent to which the agents of authority hurt other people. For example, many individuals who would never oppress an innocent person on their own become police officers, thereby acquiring legal power to commit a certain degree of oppression. Yet on many occasions, they end up going well beyond the legal oppression they are authorized to commit and become sadistic, power-happy monsters. The same is true, perhaps even more so, of soldiers. Perhaps the reason so many combat veterans end up being deeply emotionally traumatized is not so much a result of thinking about what they have witnessed, as it is a result of thinking about what they themselves have done. The high rate of suicide among combat veterans supports this thesis. It makes little sense for someone to wish for his own death simply because he has seen something horrible. It makes a lot more sense for someone to wish for his own death because he himself has done something horrible and has in fact become something horrible. The reason that the belief in authority can drive people to commit evil, but in the end cannot limit the evil they commit, is simple. Aside from whatever technical limitations there are supposed to be on an agent of authority, the primary concept that the enforcer is taught, and the primary concept that he must accept in order to do his job, is that as a representative of authority, he is above the common folk and has the moral right to forcibly control them. In short, he is taught that his badge and his position make him the rightful master of all the average people. Once he is convinced of that lie, it should be expected that he will despise the average citizen and treat him with contempt in the same way, and for the same reason, that a slave owner will treat his slave not as human beings but as property, whose feelings and opinions matter no more than the feelings and opinions of the master's cattle or his furniture. It is very telling that many modern law enforcers quickly become angry, even violent, when an average citizen simply speaks to the officer as an equal, instead of assuming the tone and demeanor of a subjugated underling. Again, this reaction is precisely the same, and has the same cause, as the reaction the slave master would have to an uppity slave speaking to him as an equal. There are plenty of examples, depicted in numerous police abuse videos on the internet, of supposed representatives of authority going into a rage and resorting to open violence simply because someone they approached spoke to them as one adult would speak to another instead of speaking as a subject would speak to a master. The state mercenaries refer to this lack of groveling as someone having an attitude. In their eyes, someone treating them as mere mortals, as if they are on the same level as everyone else, amounts to showing disrespect for their alleged authority. Similarly, anyone who does not consent to be detained, questioned, or searched by officers of the law is automatically perceived by the mercenaries of the state as some sort of troublemaker who has something to hide. Again, the real reason such lack of cooperation annoys authoritarian enforcers is because it amounts to people treating them as mere humans instead of treating them as superior beings, which is what they imagine themselves to be. To wit, if someone was confronted by a stranger, without a badge, who started interrogating the person in an obviously accusatory way and then asked to be allowed to search the person's pockets, his cars and his home, not only would the person being accosted almost certainly refuse, but he also would probably be outraged at the request. Of course, you can't rummage through my stuff. Who do you think you are? But when strangers with badges make such requests, they are the ones offended when the target of their intrusive, unjustified harassment, accusations and searches objects and refuses to cooperate. Even when the officers know full well that the Fourth and Fifth Amendment to the US Constitution specifically dictate that a person has no legal duty to answer questions or consent to searches, such lack of cooperation, the failure to unquestioningly bow to the enforcer, every whim and request is still seen by the police as a sign that the person must be some sort of criminal and enemy of the state. From the perspective of the law enforcers, only a despicable lowlife would ever treat representatives of authority in the same manner as he treats everyone else. Again, this is not how most of these people view the world before becoming officers of the law. In their authoritarian enforcement training, they are specifically taught to treat people as inferiors, to always try to gain control of everyone and everything the moment they arrive at a scene, telling everyone where to go, what to do, when they can speak, and so on. They are not merely told that they have the right to boss around everyone else, which would be dangerous enough. They are trained that they must, in every situation, use whatever it takes, commands, intimidation, and outright violence, to get everyone present to bow to their authority, and are taught that it is a crime for anyone to fail to unquestioningly bow to their will, which they characterize as disobeying a lawful order. Yeah, I get that attitude from Dutch police officers also. One time I was in the city, in downtown, so to speak, and there was a group of youngsters with, you don't call them motorcycles, they are like less than 50 cc, I don't know what you call them in English. You probably don't even have them in the United States. Alright, we call them brommers or scooters. I guess scooters you probably have, but I don't know if you guys have less than 50cc in those. Anyway, they were standing like on the sidewalk, and people had to like walk around them, and by doing so obstruct normal traffic. And so the police came and then told these youngsters to move it, right? Just don't stand there, you're blocking normal traffic in this way. And so most of them immediately obeyed and started towing their scooters away. But one of them kind of muttered something, right? I was standing right next to the guy, and I couldn't understand what he said, right? And this woman police officer said, "What did you say?" And he was like, rah, 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 rah. Yeah, still not understandable, right? And he immediately got arrested. And I was like, what? What's he being arrested for? So I asked this police officer, what crime has he committed? Right? And I get this angry look from this officer, right? And he starts pushing me away for asking a bloody question. Right? It's unbelievable, these people. It is also very significant that it is customary for the police, as soon as they arrive at any scene, to make sure that no one else is armed with any sort of weapon, and to disarm anyone who is, before knowing anything else about who the people are or what is going on, and even regardless of whether the people are legally armed. The obvious purpose of this practice is to immediately create a huge imbalance of power, where only the law enforcers have the ability to forcibly impose their will on others. Imagine the arrogance required for an average citizen to arrive at some scene, unfamiliar with the situation and the people involved, and have his first thought be, "Nobody is allowed to have a weapon except me." In short, law enforcers are trained to be oppressive megalomaniacs and to treat everyone else as cattle. And human nature being what it is, anyone who routinely treats others that way, the way law enforcers are required to treat everyone else, will learn to despise others and treat them with contempt, disrespect and hostility. However good or bad at heart an individual is to begin with, the way to bring out the worst in him is to give him authority over others. Another author's personal note. that word, right? Author. Author's personal note. Several former police officers have personally told me that they quit the force after they noticed that the job and their supposed authority was slowly turning them into monsters, one of them using that exact word. In fairness, many law officers make an effort to be nice guys and at least attempt to treat others with respect. But ultimately they cannot treat others as equals and still be law enforcers. They can be friendly and even apologetic about it. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you. But their job still requires them to coercively control and extort others. And not just those who have actually harmed someone. A cop cannot treat others as equal without losing his job. Imagine an officer who would do traffic stops or search places or detain and interrogate people or use physical force against someone only in a situation in which you would feel justified in doing such things yourself without any badge or law telling you could. The same holds true of government investigators, prosecutors and judges. And government employee, that's probably any government employee who refuses to investigate, prosecute or sentence someone for a victimless crime would quickly lose his job. It is not up to the agents of authority to decide which laws to enforce. If there are morally illegitimate laws, as there always are, all branches of authoritarian law enforcement are required to enforce them, thereby assisting in the extortion and oppression of innocent people. Even if much of what he does is aimed at actual criminals, those who have committed acts of aggression against others, every law enforcer, as part of his job, is required to commit acts of aggression himself. Donation wasn't right there. There are some who do almost nothing other than initiating violence, such as tax collectors, narcotic agents, and immigration agents. This makes it literally impossible in almost all cases to work for government without committing immoral acts of aggression. Being a law enforcer and being a moral person are almost always mutually exclusive. Alright. So, I'm gonna do this. See. Poker face. Let's see. Rather die. Alright. Gonna take a little break and let you guys enjoy some poker face.
Such possibilities each and every day. I heard a calling that was right for me. I prayed for strength for what's ahead of me. Show me the way. Please show me the way. The sun was high and burnt the night away. Who stood before me was my enemy. Don't tread on me. He's come to take away my liberties. I'd rather die than be a slave to thee. Don't chain me this way. I'd rather die than be your slave. I will survive. Can you feel my rage? It's not a question of being brave. I'd rather die than be your slave. Didn't matter who shot us that day. They killed my brothers, they lay dead by me. Hit them hard, we made them pay that day. We hung the traitors from the highest trees. Mercy from you. Mercy from me. We lost a lot, our pain was heavy. Sacrifice for God and country. Still held the ground that was in front of me. This was the price to pay for liberty. Still you hear me say, I'd rather die than be your slave.
Alright then. Welcome back, everybody. That was Pokerface. Check it out, pokerface.com. And we're gonna pick this up where we left off. By the way, go to ucy.tv in case you've never been there. Check out the website ucy.tv. However, politely, they may do the job, and despite the fact that they also go after actual criminals, the kind who have victims, law enforcers are always professional aggressors, subjugating the people to the will of the politicians by way of violence and threat of violence. Yeah, welcome, lady. And anyone who does that, if he did not already have a certain degree of contempt and hatred for his fellow man, will almost certainly develop it. To put it in another way, even the nicest, most friendly slave owner, if he continues to believe in the legitimacy of slavery and continues to practice it, will be committing evil and will inflict harm upon the people he imagines to be his rightful property. And he will naturally develop a degree of contempt toward the victims of his aggression and will behave contemptuously toward them. The ability of the authority, belief, to create harm, yeah, that sounds like okay sentence. The ability of the quote-unquote authority, belief, to create harm, and the simultaneous inability of it to limit harm, once the masters imagine himself to have the right to rule over his inferiors, can be seen not only on an individual basis, but on a large scale as well. I like my cigarette. Most of the debates and writings that led up to the ratification of the US Constitution focused on limiting the powers that the federal government would have, and on discussing all of the things that it was not allowed to do. The Bill of Rights, for example, is a list of things that the US government is constitutionally prohibited from doing. In fact, the 9th and 10th Amendments make it an open-ended list, so that the federal government, in theory, was not supposed to do anything except what the Constitution specifically authorized it to do. Right? So let's see what it. I don't even know what that says. You know, Google 9th and 10th Amendment. Here we go. This is a PDF. 9th and 10th Amendment. Alright, this is, I don't know if I can trust this. However, I'm gonna find another. Whoops. Google. 9th and 10th Amendment. Let's see. How do we get this from a reliable source, right? It says here, congressforkids.net is a site. Can you believe that crap? So why is there not a government site? law@cornell.eu. 10th Amendment. Let's see if this is something. First Amendment, 9th Amendment. Here we go. Open that. The 9th Amendment was James Madison's attempt to assure that the Bill of Rights was not seen as granting the people of the United States only the specific rights it addressed. In recent years, Some have interpreted it as affirming the existence of such unenumerated rights outside those expressly protected by the Bill of Rights. Right, so I thought it was about restricting. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Alright, I don't even understand that. You know, my English is so bad, I don't even understand that sentence. How about one of you guys call me in Skype and tell me what this is about, right? Let's try 10th. Open that. You guys are in the United States, you should know this, right? The 10th Amendment helps to define the concept of federalism. Helps to define the relationship between federal and state governments. As the federal activity has increased, so too has the problem of reconciling state and national interests as they apply to the federal powers to tax, to police, and to regulations such as wage and hour laws. Disclosure of personal information in record-keeping systems and laws related to strip mining. Amendment 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Right, that I understand a little bit more. And still, it doesn't tell me much, though. You see, here it says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution. All right, so that is a lot, right? Those are a lot of powers, nor prohibited by it, by the Constitution, I guess, to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Alright, so my understanding is that there is the United States, which is something else as a state, right? It's a bit like in Holland we have the Staat der Nederlanden, which means the state of the Netherlands, and we have provinces, something like that. I don't think it's an accurate comparison though, because a state is like a country, right? And a Dutch province is not a country. Alright, so who's gonna call me in about this 9th? Give me some feedback here. Come on, you guys. Anyone on the 9th gonna call in? Jongen, 9th. 9th. Yeah. You know, Solvinur at Skype. You tell me what that is, because I don't understand one word of it. Alright. So, let's see. This is what Larkin Rose here says. Makes much more sense, right? The Bill of Rights, for example, is a list of things the United States government is constitutionally prohibited from doing, right? Okay. Nonetheless, with the possible exception of the Third Amendment, the Bill of Rights also happens to be a list of rights that federal agents violate every single day, in every state in the Union. In reality, whether on an individual or national level, telling someone you have the right to rule others but only within these limits will sooner or later result in that person dominating others without recognizing any limits to his power. Yes, lady, but like I said, I don't understand that sentence not one bit. It says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. You know, it just doesn't make sense to me, that whole sentence. Shall not be construed to deny or disparage others, and then retained. What is retained? And what the heck is enumerate? And then construed to deny? You know, it just doesn't make sense to me. My English is just not good enough for that. Then says, this amendment means that nothing written in the Constitution can be used to cancel amendments to it. To cancel amendments to it? Ah, like that. Well, no, you know, as far as I know, and this is just how I understand it, right? The Constitution is not written for you and me, for ordinary people. It's written for the government. They are supposed to abide by these rules. Right? They don't, but they're supposed to. And then if you say, this amendment means that nothing written in the Constitution can be used to cancel amendments to it, that makes sense. Right? Is that what it means? So it, you know, it's written for government, not you and me. Enumerate is to name things one after another in a list. Aha, okay, thank you, lady. The word number is in there, right? Enumerate. Alright, in the long run, there is no such thing and can be no such thing as limited government. Because once someone is accepted by others as a rightful master and believes himself to have the moral right to rule, there will be nothing and no one above him with the power to restrain him. Inside a government, a higher authority might choose to limit a lower authority, but logic and experience show that an authoritarian hierarchy, taken as a whole, will never limit itself for long. Why would it? Why would a master even ever, put his own interests below the interests of his slave? The Constitution is a perfect example of this. A piece of parchment which purported to grant very limited authority to certain people, but which utterly failed to stop those people from going beyond those limits, creating something that eventually grew into the most powerful authoritarian empire in history. Yeah. And the problem cannot be solved by appointing another set of masters. Like a court system, right? Inside the same authoritarian structure, with the supposed purpose of enforcing limits upon the first set of masters. Separation of powers and checks and balances and due process are meaningless if the masters are those assigned and those assigned to limit them are both part of the same authoritarian organization. Yeah, that makes sense, right? Blah, blah. The next heading is demonizing the victim. It is important to stress the fact that in Milgram's experiments the subject thought they were shocking innocent strangers. There was no accusation that the one being shocked was a bad person or had done anything immoral. It should be obvious that if the average person will, at the behest of authority, inflict pain upon an innocent person, he will also inflict such pain with less hesitation and less guilt upon someone he imagines to be deserving of such pain. The US military, and presumably many other militaries, have done a lot of research to determine what can be done to overcome a soldier's natural aversion to killing, so that he will kill on command. And one of the most effective ways of achieving this is to demonize and dehumanize the one he is being told to shoot. In modern wars, the governments of both sides feed their soldiers constant propaganda designed to paint the enemy as a bunch of heartless, vicious, sadistic, inhuman monsters. Yeah. Ironically, this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because such propaganda makes both sides into gangs and heartless monsters, zealously trying to exterminate enemies that they do not view as fully human beings. Alright, it says as being fully human. Similar tactics are used in law enforcement. The hired mercenary of government are far more likely to... Alright, we'll try this again after this. Lady Pitbull says in the chat, the 9th Amendment is the constitutional safety net intended to make clear that individuals have other fundamental rights, in addition to those listed in the 1st through 8th Amendment. Some of the framers, why use that word? To frame somebody, right? Some of the framers had raised concerns that because it was impossible to list every fundamental right, it would be dangerous to list just some of them. For example, the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, and so forth, for fear of suggesting that the list was complete. Alright? The group of framers opposed a Bill of Rights entirely and favored a more general declaration of fundamental rights. But others, including many state representatives, had refused to ratify the Constitution without a more specific list of protection, so that the first Congress added the 9th Amendment as a compromise. Because the rights protected by the 9th Amendment are not specified, they are referred to as unenumerated. The Supreme Court has found that unenumerated rights include such important rights as the right to travel, the right to vote, the right to vote, the right to keep personal matters private and to make important decisions about one's health and care and body. Right? So I don't know if you guys have heard me speak about the European Constitution. I mean, if you've ever seen something evil, it's that, right? Same goes for the United Nations. They also have such a thing. It's also very, very horrific if you know how to read that stuff. I mean, it's much, much worse than what you guys in the United States have. Even though nobody in authority is actually complying by those rules. You know, they should be put in jail for that or something. Yeah, thanks, lady. That was good. Alright. Similar tactics are used in law enforcement. The hired mercenaries of government are far more likely to inflict injustice and oppression upon someone if that person has first been dehumanized and demonized. Just the terminology used by the masters, the enforcers, and everyone else constitutes a very effective form of mind control, which alters how both enforcers and their targets perceive reality, thereby affecting how both groups behave. Such terms reinforce the premise that obedience to authority is a virtue and that disobedience is a sin. What literally happens is that one group of people issues a command, and their enforcers impose it upon the masses by punishing disobedience. This is what the mafia does, what street gangs do, what schoolyard bullies do, and what all governments do. The difference is that when government does it, it uses not only threats but also indoctrination of both the enforcer and the general public. Where the message of most thugs is usually direct and honest, do as I say or I will hurt you, the government message involves a great deal of psychology and mind control, which is essential to making the state mercenaries feel righteous about inflicting oppression on others. The controllers in government portray themselves as lawmakers, who have the right to govern society, portray their commands as laws, and portray anyone who disobey as criminals. And unlike mafia heavies, those who administer retribution against any who disobey the politicians are portrayed not merely as hired thugs, but as noble law enforcers who are righteously protecting society from all the uncivilized, contemptuous lawbreakers. Yeah. Such propaganda goes a long way, not only toward making the authoritarian enforcers carry out violence against innocent people, but also toward making them feel proud of it. Yeah. Let's see if I can do that. Stop it here. Let me see, maybe I can give you guys some Dutch news. VVD, criminelen, see what we get. Is de V een criminele organisatie? Let's see what we get there. This is from a rather dubious site, but still. Because, you know, at my work they talk about this. It should be clear, and I'm just translating this right from Dutch to English, right? It should be clear that the frauders and big money grabbers feel at home at the VVD, right? The VVD is a Dutch political party. They seem to, what's that? They seem to cling together, and I wonder if it's not high time to call the VVD a criminal organization, right? And you get 128 reactions on that, and one of them comes with a ad hominem. That's so cool, right? You immediately recognize it as an ad hominem. One says, well, that's nonsense, you jealous, hating lefties. Fantastic, right? Yeah. One says they can go as far as I'm concerned. Here another one that says it's in any case it's an organization with lots of criminals, right? Here another one. All politicians are money grabbers. Let's see. Bla bla bla. Het heeft ontzettend lang geduurd. It's been a long time before the average Dutch person actually got it. First the CDA, all right. So apparently the CDA has been caught in controversies as well, because in the last couple of months it's been the VVDs, politicians who have come in the news because of fraud and everything. And now it's the VVD, right? There where other normal hardworking people always had trouble with. They can just keep doing it. Alright? These politicians, they can just keep doing it, right? And then he says the worst part is that the VVD is actually the boss of the Justice Department. She says here, or he, that we're going into the direction of a national police state. Yeah, right. You think so? Oh, here's one that comes with a refreshing one. It's posted by Freedom is Slavery. Yeah, you'll recall that from 1984, right? He says, not only the VVD, the state itself is a criminal organization who steals money from the civilians under threat of violence, right? Innocent people kidnaps and locks up and is responsible for giving support to slaughtering people in far countries. Now, there's a refreshing one, right? Even hits the nail right on the head, doesn't he? Alright, that's about enough of that. I hope you guys liked it. Little Dutch political rumble jumble. No. Alright. Where were we? Yeah, such propaganda to that goes a long way, not only toward making the authoritarian enforcers carry out violence against innocent people, but also toward making them feel proud of it. They are convinced, via their authoritarian indoctrination, that they are bringing criminals to justice, thereby maintaining law and order for the benefit of society. But what they are actually doing, more often than not, is using violence. Yeah, hold on, Ben. Hold on, Dan. I'll get that link for you. And like I said, it's a rather dubious site. They are politically tainted as well. So, but anyway, I'll give you that link. Let me just finish this sentence here. But what they are actually doing, more often than not, is using violence to coerce everyone into obeying whatever commands the politicians issue. However immoral, arbitrary, socially or economically destructive, or downright idiotic those commands may be. Alright, so here we go. The link for is the VVD a criminal organization? Put that in the chat room. Here you go, Dan. There is a big difference in the connotations of the two terms law enforcer and political thug. There is no difference, however, in what they literally mean. But by persuading the enforcer that the violence they use constitutes inherently righteous and noble law enforcement, their perceptions can be altered in such a way that they will gladly and proudly impose the ruling class's will upon their fellow man. There are as many examples of this as there are laws, but they all fall into one of two categories. Prohibitions, whereby politicians proclaim that their subjects are not allowed to do a certain thing, and demands, whereby politicians proclaim that their subjects must do a certain thing. One example of each will suffice to demonstrate the point. All right. Prohibition. The controller. Let me roll another ciggy, guys. Prohibition. The controllers issue a decree that their subjects may not possess marijuana. That prohibition is proclaimed to be a law, and any who disobey it are deemed to be criminals. The controllers then spend huge amount of money taken from their subjects by way of a different law to pay for mercenaries, guns, armored vehicles, prison, and so on, for the sole purpose of taking captive any who are caught disobeying their law. Now consider the perspective of the police officer assigned the duty of enforcing that law, who discovers that someone has been selling marijuana to willing customers. If the officer could objectively consider the situation without the myth of authority distorting his perception, he would immediately see that his job is not only immoral but utterly idiotic and hypocritical. His job being to physically capture someone for the purpose of putting that person in a cage for a long time, for doing something that was neither fraudulent nor violent. In fact, until the cop showed up, all the people involved, grower, dealer, seller, buyer, user, interacted peacefully and voluntarily. Furthermore, if the officer has ever consumed alcohol, he would be guilty of something morally identical to what the criminal has done. Nonetheless, he will see himself as the brave, noble law enforcer as he participates in a paramilitary armed invasion of the person's home and forcibly captures and drags the what? Scofflaw? Scofflaw. Ah, I get it. Scofflaw. Scofflaw. Away from his friends and family. Yeah. I'm guessing here, right? In Dutch we have a word that sounds a bit like it, and it sounds a bit like Jewish. We say schoffie. Sounds Jewish to me. It's a bad word. And it also ties to the word, in Dutch anyway, it's etymologically tied to the word civilization. Because we call that beschaafd. You hear the tie, right? Schoffie, beschaafd. Alright, so much for Scofflaw. Then the office, Alright, this sentence is probably not as it's supposed to be. Anyway, I'll read it as it stands here. Then the office, I will go home and have a beer. And of course, would not react kindly to anyone who tried to forcibly stop him from doing so. The only difference, which is no real difference at all, is that politicians made up a command about one mind-altering substance, marijuana, and another. What's so funny about that, Ben? It just is. I mean, we have a lot of those Jewish words in our language. You know, it's probably because we, quote-unquote, welcomed them when they were seen as bad guys everywhere else in Europe. You know, they fled to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam and other cities. where they would be safe, right? We even named money some Jewish name, right? When we still had the guilder, a whole 100 guilder, like the bill, 100 guilder was called a Meyer. Well, that's Jewish. Funny, right? We call money even with Jewish names. Yeah. The only difference, which is no real difference at all, is that politicians made up a command about one mind-ring substance, marijuana, and not the other, alcohol. As a result, the officer will truly believe that using one mind-altering substance is a good, wholesome, all-American behavior, while using another is shady, immoral, and criminal, and even justifies violent assault and kidnapping of the perpetrators. Alright. Demand. The controllers enact a law saying that any of their subjects who own property must give to the controllers every year hello Ben, a payment in the amount of 2% of the value of the subject's property. 2%? Is that all? That demand is called property tax and is proclaimed to be the law. Only 2%? And there's people here in the Netherlands that work 40 hours a week, and 60% of what they own goes right back to the government. I say right back because they work for the government. That demand is called the property tax and is proclaimed to be the law. And any who disobey it are criminals and tax cheats. The controllers then set up an organization of tax collectors to find anyone who disobeyed, to either forcibly extract money from them or to forcibly evict them from their properties and seize such properties and give them to the controllers. Alright, so I'm saying like only 2%, right? It's still stealing. Alright? No matter what percentage. It's still stealing. Robbing. Of course, if anyone did that without all of the authoritarian propaganda, it would be called extortion. You have to pay me a bunch of money every year or I won't let you live in your own house. And very few people, including those who now work as tax collectors, would want to be part of such a racketeering scheme. Yeah, we have that same thing here in the Netherlands. They call it onroerend goed belasting. Onroerend goed means stuff that doesn't move, right? So your house, it doesn't move. And belasting means taxes, right? They apparently think that it's their land that this house is standing on, and so you have to pay like a rent or something. If you don't, they will take your house from you. Can you believe that crap? Yet when the exact same thing is done legally, not only will average people accept a job being part of such an extortion racket, but they will show disdain for anyone who resists it. Those who then try not to be robbed are viewed as greedy tax cheats, who don't want to pay their fair share. And those whose job it is to forcibly take money or property from such tax cheats usually do so with a feeling of righteousness because they truly believe that the authority of law can take what is usually an immoral act, theft, extortion and racketeering, and transform it into something righteous and legitimate. So they commit mass robbery, feel good about it, and feel contempt for their victims. That is the power of the most dangerous superstition. Statists often argue that taxation is not theft because government use tax revenue for things that are for the common good. So it's just a matter of people paying for goods and services they receive. Such an argument ignores the fundamental nature of the situation. A simple example makes a double standard obvious. Suppose a stranger came up to you and said that he had mowed your lawn or left an item for you at your house and now demanded that you give him $1,000, though you had never agreed to any such arrangement. Yeah, very good example. Obviously, that would constitute extortion, and you would have no duty to pay, even if you really had mowed your lawn or left you something. No one has the right, without your consent, to provide you some item or service. And now we go back to what we discussed last week. If you don't have the right to do such things, that means that you cannot have somebody that represents you to have that right. That's impossible, right? Because you can't give away something you don't have yourself. Right? Obviously, that would constitute... we did that. No one has the right, without your consent, to provide you some item or service when you didn't ask for it and didn't want to buy it, and then forcibly take from you whatever he declares the item or service to be worth. And yet, that is exactly what every government at every level always does. When targets of authoritarian aggression are successfully demonized and dehumanized, there are essentially no limits to the degree of violence and injustice which those who believe in authority will commit. For any who might still have the hope that the consciousness of American soldiers and law enforcers might limit the level of injustice they are willing to inflict upon complete strangers, there are plenty of real-world examples that prove otherwise. One of the most one of the most well-known would have to be the massacre at My Lai during the Vietnam War, where US troops not only murdered hundreds of unarmed civilians, mostly women and children, but also sexually assaulted and tortured some, and some soldiers openly delighted in the suffering and deaths of their victims by the soldiers' own testimonies. My Lai. I never even heard of that. M-Y, as in my, and L-A-I. This is what American soldiers did as a result of their loyalty to the myth of authority, combined with the demonization and dehumanization of their victims. The soldiers themselves put it perfectly bluntly, one saying they were just following orders, another saying that most of the US soldiers there didn't consider the Vietnamese human. It should be noted that there were some American soldiers who tried with little success to stop or limit the massacre. Alright. While this might have been one of the most famous examples of wartime atrocities committed by the American troops, it is certainly, well, what comes to my mind immediately is the bombing of Dresden. Right? I'll type that in the chat, that name of the city, if you've never ever heard of that. It's fucking outrageous. Second World War, bombing of Dresden, right? While this might have been one of the most famous examples of wartime atrocities committed by American troops, it is certainly not the only one. In fact, new examples of the sadism, that's right, Rode, of American soldiers keep coming to light. Whereas in the Milgram experiments, some test subjects would demonstrate, verbally or by their behavior, that they felt bad about inflicting harm upon other innocent strangers. Law enforcers and soldiers who are first taught to despise an enemy obey authoritarian commands even more eagerly, often in a way that shows they delight in inflicting pain and death on their victims. Alright, what also comes to mind is shows I'm so bad with names, right? Because of that Fukushima thing, I can't even get them. Hiroshima, right? Nagasaki. Those two, same thing. This was plainly displayed in the images that came out of the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq, showing that American troops, male and female, not only carried out mental and physical torture, but exhibited delight and amusement at the suffering of their victims, even happily posing for the camera while humiliating. Oh, it's 58, we have to call it. Look, thanks everybody in the chat. Del, Dan, Hopper, Jax, JJ, Joe, Jules, Lay Pitbull, Road Dog, Top Knot, Vincent Easley, and The Greaser, and one and all. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back next week. We're going to continue this. We've done about a little bit more than 1/3, I guess. And we'll continue it then there. Alright? Well, he's even talking about Bush and Obama administration here. Well, we'll get to that next week. I'll just click this away so we'll remember where we were next week. There we go.
The very word secrecy.
Yep. Says the
We are as a people, inherently and historically,
So
opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths.
JFK will be, you know. Anyway, thanks for
I think a
listening.
new world order is emerging.
I'll be back next week. Take care, people.
An inside job? How dare you? How dare you?
To create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific